You are listening to the Prepared School Psych podcast, where we focus on providing practical strategies and insights. Today, I have the honor of speaking with Brandi Rosen. Brandi is an experienced educator with a passion for simplifying the complexities of teaching, guiding educators through the intricacies of IEP writing, and supporting effective behavior management strategies. With extensive experience as a program coordinator, behaviorist, and university faculty member, Brandi specializes in helping educators navigate the challenges of education through practical, legally sound, and student centered solutions. I am so happy to have you here on the show today, Brandi. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
Well, we like to kick off with an important question. What is your favorite TV show that you are watching right now?
Well, I say I have to go through with two, and this kind of shows how kind of chaotic things are. Is that my two most favorite shows right now are the Great British Baking Show, which I've watched over and over and over, which is like my calming show, and then White Lotus, which is the complete opposite of that. So that's sort of depending on where my brain is for the day, that's what I watch.
I will tell you, I am a big fan of The White Lotus. I am enjoying season 3 and
It's nice.
realized that they had a companion podcast. So now I'm catching up on all of their podcast episodes.
I did hear that. I'm gonna wait until after, but yes, it's very as it always is, you finish and you're kinda like, "What just happened there?"
Absolutely. Well, in one sentence, how would your colleagues describe you as an educator?
I think probably passionate and kind of forward thinking or out of the box thinking. I've always, kind of thought differently about education. I've always looked at it a little bit differently. I always want to look at like what can we be doing differently? What can we really my biggest passion is making sure that what we're doing is really impactful. It doesn't just look good on paper, but like what are we actually doing? My thoughts are always like when this student is 30 years old, like, is this gonna be beneficial to them? And, that's kind of what guides my thinking because I think we can get caught into a cycle of like, this is how we do it and this is what we do it, but is it really helping? And then just looking at kind of how those needs have changed since, I got into education 30 years ago. The kids are different, the teachers are different, the needs are different. So always kind of looking at what we can shift to make everything more meaningful.
I'm curious, what have you found with your out of box thinking in regards to the other people that you are working with? Do you feel like there's a lot of similar type of thinking, like, thank you for thinking of this, let's go? Do you feel like you've gotten a lot of pushback? What has kind of been the experience?
I think when you come in with the message like, "This is gonna make your life easier," or "This is gonna make what you're doing matter more without adding a bunch of extra time," that's always the key, then I think people are always open. And the other piece of that, I think, is that really with educators, because as we know, it's like, this is the new big thing, and this is the next new big thing, and then you spend 2 weeks getting trained on this, and then 2 years later, it's a new thing. And so really just kind of helping people see we're not throwing out what we know works. It's like, how do we just shift things to really meet the needs of right now? And because I've been able to stay in classrooms, in education, then my ideas come from the place of right now, as opposed to sometimes people come in, they haven't been in the classroom for 10 years. And it's like the kids 10 years ago are not the same kids as today. So I think really, if you come in with that approach, I found that to be really successful and people to be really open to that.
What originally sparked that passion for education and specifically working with educators on IEPs and behavior management? I know some of the topics you love to discuss with teachers.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny because when I got out of college, I was a social worker and I did not plan on being in education. And I was working at a drug and alcohol rehab center where at that time the women could come and bring their kids. And I was working like at the daycare part of that. And I just met this, child who changed everything for me. And I realized that I was looking for something where I had longer with kids and where I could really make an impact because the kids came and went so much through the social work environment. And so I went back to study special ed. So that was just the perfect fit. And I originally worked with students with severe emotional and behavioral disorders. So again, that's what kind of guided the behavior piece of that. And then moved into autism as well. And so I think that's kind of what sparked that passion. As far as supporting teachers, I think just coming from a place where there wasn't a lot of support and knowing how hard it is to kinda dig your way through all of that has always just been like, it shouldn't be that hard. Special educators, it's already such a hard job, it shouldn't be harder, and you shouldn't have to figure it all out on your own. So, that was really kind of where that came from, and the behavior piece just because I think that in so many ways, helping kids learn to manage their behavior and learn to have more functional behaviors is the answer for most kids. It's generally not the academics that get in their way, it's the behaviors. And so the more
Right.
we can support kids in that way and really see that as another deficit and not like they're just bad kids or just like, okay, well, this is something that they haven't learned to do yet. So how do we teach them to do that?
Well, and I think that links back to what you said before about thinking about the students when they're 30. And I think about that when we talk about behavior plans and, what kind of strategies are we trying to teach these students? It's not just some other random behavior, it is a behavior that is going to help support them for lifelong. We're all going to be in situations where we kind of want to escape the situation or we'd like some more attention and it
We
might
know
not be
what
the
to
best,
do. Right.
most functional way to get that.
Yeah. And I think that there's a tendency with behaviors to avoid them, that a lot of, like, programming is around how to make the behaviors not come out, and, I guess after being in education for so long, you see kids as they grow up, and if that's the only intervention we're doing with kids, then when they get out in the world, they don't have the skills to manage their behaviors, and that to me is really sad, like, then I feel like we haven't done our part to give them the best chance that they have.
Well, and you've held a lot of different roles: program coordinator, behaviorist, university faculty. How have all these different experiences really shaped your approach to consulting and training different educators?
That's a great question. I feel like that it was a very important part of sort of my development as a consultant, as an educator, but certainly being able to work with teachers and administration. One of the main things that I gained from all of that was that you just learn to work with very different kinds of people.
Hmm.
And that's really important. And so, one of my main goals is when I walk into a situation or a school or a district, my first thing I want to understand is like, what do they want out of this? I might know what I think is the best thing to teach them or to give to them. But if that's not what they're looking for or not what they're ready for, then it
Mhm.
doesn't do us any good. And I do think that's where a lot of training and consultation goes bad is that we're presenting something that we know works. But if they're not there, or if they're not interested, or if they're not ready for that, then it doesn't matter, right? And
Mhm.
I think of it the same way we work with kids, right? We start where they are and then we build up. And so I think working with so many different people with different needs, different approaches, and different roles, it really does help me to go into the situation and be like, okay, let me take a minute because I think when I was younger, my first thing is I'd go in and I'd be like, this is the right thing and this is how we do it. And now I think that through my experience, I'm able to go in and say, all right, well, let's see where they are and what they want and how do I help build that piece up? And then certainly you build up that trust and it's a lot easier to kind of move forward with that. I also think that certainly my job as a program coordinator in a very litigious district has given me a, quite a bit of skill and experience in reading a room and kind of seeing what's going on and being able to de-escalate situations and things like that. I think that's been as hard as it was in the moment, it's definitely given me a skill set that helps then work with just a whole variety of people.
Well, I love what you were saying. Consulting with schools and with teachers, similar to how we're helping to support students, it makes me think about some of the questions we ask when we are doing those behavior analyses of our students of, is this skill that we're asking them to do even in their repertoire of skills?
Right.
Or do we need to look at prerequisite skills? And it makes me think about, how many times have we written a behavior plan and just given it to a teacher with an assumption that they know how to implement all those pieces, that they have all of those skill sets. We would never just walk into a classroom and just assume all of the students have all of these different skills to get this math lesson done, right? We
Right,
teach all
right,
those different pieces.
right.
So I think that can be a useful analogy, whether we're doing school-wide, class-wide, or individual consultation, is that check-in on, does everyone have these skills that are necessary in order to implement the most amazing behavior plan that might have been written?
Right.
And if no one knows how to implement, it's just an interesting piece of paper.
For sure, and that with the behavioral background, I can come in and write a behavioral program that has 43 steps and a fading plan and beautiful the whole thing, but, like, what good is that if nobody knows and most people wouldn't know how to do that? And,
Mhm.
it makes me think also with what you're saying is that I think that as consultants, as school psychologists, as people that come in and support and then maybe step out, I think that it's really also important to remember that there are multiple ways to get to the same place.
Mm,
And so if a teacher doesn't feel comfortable or doesn't feel like they have a skill set in a certain way, they might have a skill set in a different way. And so being open to that idea, which again, I think comes with that experience of working with different kinds of people, is like
mhm.
even just a simple example of going into a school and wanting to help a general ed teacher set up a reinforcement system, something like that, as either a consultant or a special ed teacher. It's like it doesn't have to be one way. We can make
Mm,
that look a bunch of different ways. And even that idea that, like, if you might have a teacher who's like, I don't want to use food. I'm just giving an example. Like,
yeah.
okay, that's great. We have a million other things. What sounds good to you? Or I don't want to give, toys. I want to do this. So, really being open to that idea that, like, there's a lot of different ways to get to the same end. And then the other piece that came up that just popped into my head as you were talking is that I do think that even in special ed, our teachers don't get a lot of training
Mhm.
in behavior and classroom management. And certainly gen ed teachers don't. So when we go in as special ed teachers and say, like, here, this is what you need to do, they've had maybe one class.
Right.
And so I compare it when I do trainings, I compare it. I say, like, if somebody said, go do brain surgery, it doesn't matter if I like watched a show about brain surgery, I'm still not going to be able to do it? And so we need to keep that in mind when we're consulting and as special ed teachers, when we're going in and telling them what students need.
Well, and you get to mentor, and I know have in the past as well, mentor a lot of new teachers. What are some of those bigger challenges that you find that new teachers face, and what are ways that you have found to be most helpful to support them?
I mean, honestly, I would say overwhelm. Like that, I just think that special ed teachers, it is a very hard job. And it's harder. It's harder than it was. When I think being able to tell teachers that, new teachers, like from the beginning, the worst thing to say is like, this isn't so bad, you'll get it, or whatever. It's like, no, it's a lot. It's great and it's a lot. And so I really think just helping them just organize their time and organize the process. And there's nothing that's more helpful than helping them calendar for 6 months. That's like such a relief for teachers often is like, oh, okay, well, now I know I'm going to send the assessment plan home on this date. I'm going to assess on this date. Like just getting those things really helpful. And then, I mean, writing IEPs. It still surprises me how little experience they get with that before they get into the classroom. And I mean, some of them come out of programs where they've never actually written a full IEP.
Wow.
And you're just like, that's terrible. They should have written 50 IEPs by the time they get out of their programs. So that's just a lot to learn. And then they have to learn the computer system and forget about teaching. And then on top,
Right.
they have to learn to teach. So I think just really that overwhelm is what gets teachers, and it just feels kind of like impossible to get everything done.
And I have found that too, working with school psychologists, speech and language pathologists, as well as special education teachers. I've been doing some trainings regarding the IEP document and realizing how many people are just placed in their position with no training, like you mentioned, either the university or the school district
Right.
themselves. And I was recently talking with a group and I said, raise your hand if anyone's ever told you how to fill out the present levels page. And, like, no one raised their hand, and I said, "When's the last time you got feedback in case we were doing it wrong?"
Yeah.
And, like, no one raised their hand. And so we're just doing the best we're doing based on, for a lot of us, the minimum amount of feedback that we've been receiving.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, yeah, that is the to me, that's, like, again, insanity. We wouldn't expect any other professional to have to do their job with that little training or support, you know? And then I think a lot of times what they don't get feedback, the only feedback they get that is, like, "You're not doing it good enough." At some point, there's a, like, we're not sure you're fit for this," or that kinda thing, and that just is not what we want. It's hard to get special ed staff of all kind. We wanna support them and make sure that their experience is good.
Well, school psych, special ed teachers, SLPs, that burned out feeling, that overwhelm feeling, complexity of IEPs, behavior management, it goes across so many of our different disciplines. What advice might you give to someone to kind of deal with that overwhelm? You talked about the calendar, which I know for me is one of my favorite things. Like, let's just schedule something
It makes
so I
me
can
think
figure out and backwards map some things. What are some of other useful tips that you have shared?
what across the board with special ed staff, because it's so complicated. uh, my first message is always like, you're not going to be perfect at all of this at once, right? Like, just not. This is going to take some time. So let's prioritize what's the most important. What do you really need to be doing? And that is often based on schools and what their district wants from them. And then sometimes it's based on themselves. But really looking at, so the first thing that in your position that they want is that you write really good IEPs. Okay, so let's do that first. Or is the first thing that they want is to make sure that you have all your kids scheduled and you're doing curriculum on day one? Like, let's take care of that. But just helping them understand that you can't do it all and that you have to be able to prioritize what's important for you and for the school. And then on top of that, which is always in one of my courses, it's the first module that I do, and teachers are always like, I don't even want to talk about this, but like self care. There has to be a level of self care involved, even when it feels like there's no way to get through everything.
Yeah.
Because the truth is tomorrow there'll be a whole lot more to do, you know? And so at some point you need to like stop working. You need to turn off your email. You need to make some time for yourself, whether that be you work out or you go out with friends or like you have to have a balance or you will burn out really, really quick. I mean, special ed teachers have an average burnout rate of 3 to 5 years. Like
Wow.
that's really not great. That's
Mhm.
not what we want. So the more that we can help teachers say like, okay, I have to stop for tonight, or I have to go to my kid's performance tonight and I'm going to be fully there and things like that, so that that helps them too. So, but I really think the more organized they feel, the less overwhelmed they feel, as we all do.
Yes. Do you support executive functioning challenges for students, but struggle to manage your own? As an educator, you're likely constantly juggling deadlines, meetings, and 1,001 responsibilities. It's no surprise that staying organized and focused on your own tasks feels like a never ending challenge. The Executive Functioning Academy, Educator Edition, is designed to change that. In just 9 sessions, you'll gain practical strategies to manage your time, reduce stress, and create systems that actually work for you. You'll walk away feeling more confident, organized, and prepared so you can focus on what truly matters. Take more control of your day and finally feel on top of your work with strategies that fit your life. Register today at jennyponzuric.com/EF Academy. That's jennyponzuric.com/EF for Executive Functioning Academy. Or simply click the link in the show notes to learn more. I look forward to seeing you there. Now, let's get back to the episode. I'm curious, I'm going to go back to the prioritizing. Have you found that a lot of the teachers that you work with know the priorities that either from the district level or the site level, or is that something that you are encouraging them to ask to determine that? Because I feel like a lot of times when we get into new roles, the priority is you need to be good at everything.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. That's a great point. And sometimes that's something that we as a team just have to personalize, because yes, I think most district level would say it just has to all be good, especially in special ed, right? Because we don't have a lot of leeway. We have legal issues. We have to provide the services. We have to have the IEP. But on a personal level, that doesn't mean compared to students who are learning, right? Like, we know we need to get them to read. It
Mhm.
doesn't mean that pushing them faster than they can actually learn it is gonna get them to read, right? Like, we know that's human learning, that's human growth. So, I definitely think that that's some of just working with a teacher on their own to kind of figure, but it is also if you're getting feedback on one particular thing, if you continue to hear, or if you're late on your IEPs, or you know that that's going to be a problem. And whether it's unfortunate or fortunate, in most cases, the priorities is going to be the IEPs because we have legal timelines and we have things to do. And so, it can be frustrating for teachers where they're like, when do I teach? Like, when do I get to do this? And I think one of the motivators can be like, the more organized we get with this, the more we get this down, the more time you have to teach. But the
Mhm.
reality is that this is part of being a special ed person, whether that's a psych or a speech, or a big part of it is paperwork. But I do think it's unfortunate that many of them don't come with enough practice and enough experience that then becomes basically the whole first year for them.
Well, for people who are looking to improve their understanding of IEPs and behavior management, do you have some go-to resources, books, websites that you typically share to help support?
Well, one of the reasons that I've created the programs that I've created because there was so little out there for IEPs, that was really one of the things I found. There's, like, a lot of resources that are kind of big picture for
Mhm.
IEPs, but for practical, like you said, what should go into present levels, what shouldn't, those kinds of things. There just is not very much, and so that is why I created the IEPs Untangled. For behavior, I found the same thing. There's certainly more out there, but a lot of times it's a lot. Like, it doesn't necessarily as hands-on. I still come back to The First Days by Wong, that book, which is so old. I mean, they do have a new edition, but especially for, like, setting up your procedures and setting up your rules and learning how to do that, it really still is a great handbook, and so some of that how to just be a teacher kind of thing, they do a really great job with that. But it is unfortunate, especially in special ed, that we just don't see a lot of basic, usable, quick support that they can open up a book and be like, "Oh, that's what this is, and that's what I'm supposed to do." I think also with the behavior piece, a lot of times if you look up books in classroom behavior, it becomes very, like, technical, very academic, and
Mm,
so which is always a turnoff for teachers because they're like, "That's not what I need. I need to know, like, what do I do today when I walk into the classroom?"
right.
And so I think that's where we again, that's where all of my focus is in my consulting and what I create because I just think it's really a hole that we don't have for teachers in the way that we should.
Well, go ahead and talk about because I know you've created, as you've been alluding to, some different resources. Do you want to go ahead and share some of those great things that you have been creating and sharing with educators?
I originally created a course called IEPs Untangled, and I created it specifically for that reason. Is like I found that so many of the teachers didn't know just the important sections of the IEP. And so over the years that I've been doing this, my thinking has evolved in IEPs and how to make it easier and how to really teach it. And so what I found is that the more that you can teach, like this leads to this, to this, to this, to this, and it's a visual that way, then teachers are like, oh, I get it. So the reason that it's important to write present levels is because that tells us what our goals are. And then the goals tell us what our services should be. And so then it's meaningful. And I think once you show that it's meaningful and not just paperwork, which is one of the things I was seeing a lot of and hearing a lot of, is like basically the IEP is just paperwork to get through so that we can do the teaching.
Oh,
And I was
wow.
like, "That's not what we want it to be." So then I originally created IEPs Untangled, and I've used that for years. That's a self-paced course. You just, create, you buy. But I do a lot of in-person training on that, and a lot of the schools I do consulting on that. And then the next step came into the same kind of thing is like, how do we do behavior in classrooms, both general and special ed? in a way that's practical and step by step. And so I was doing a lot of consulting in districts with, kind of a specific process that I use when I teach behavior. And everybody was like, that's so easy. Like, how do we do that? And I was like, oh, okay, let me get that out there a little bit too. So I created those two really early on. And that's been a lot of what I've been doing for consulting and a lot of professional development. And then over the last few years, I created these learning academies for both classroom management and special education. And those are more comprehensive. It's like 12 modules and it has a bunch of support, but it really is to be able to provide as close to an in-person consulting support as you could get without being in person, because so many teachers were struggling with that. Like, "Hi, I need this, like I need more consistent support. I need to have more." And so I created those so that if you're not lucky enough to have somebody like you consulting or somebody coming in and consulting, you can kind of have that support without having a person. So really that's been my goal always, to make things very practical. All the content is like simple. You work through it, you end up with something you can use. That's that. Like, I've been in education for 30 years, so I've spent quite a bit of time in PDs that don't help me get anywhere or are really interesting, but so complicated that I know the reality is I'm never going to get through it to actually do it. So my goal was always to not do that. So all of the programs are for any staff that writes IEPs or does behavior. It's not just necessarily teachers. And yeah, so that's been really good. And then I go in and I consult through Teaching Untangled, which is my business. I do a lot of district consulting in both of those areas. And as you know, that looks really different depending on the schools I go into, which is fun. I absolutely love it. It's really great. So that was really my idea, is like how to bring content to teachers that's meaningful. And I'm not asking you to put in a bunch of extra time. Like, those were my two kind of priorities in creating everything that I create.
Well, and we will make sure to put links to all of the wonderful things that
Yeah.
you have created into the show notes so that if anyone is interested in learning more about that, they can easily check out those resources. So thank you so much for all the work that you put into creating such amazing resources.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it's been fun, but I really do. It feels great when I hear like, teachers like, oh, now this makes sense. You're like, yeah, that's what I want for you. So then that overwhelm is less because it makes sense.
Well, reflecting back to when you were starting out 30 years ago, what advice would you give to someone starting out in the field today? As you know, it is not exactly the same as 30 years ago.
Mhm.
So, what would be some tips or strategies for someone starting out in special ed?
Be really patient with yourself. And I think know what you're going into. So I talk to a lot of teachers, a lot of, school psychs, a lot of people in the field who are like, I didn't expect it to be so much paperwork, or I didn't expect it to be this, or I didn't expect it to be so stressful. It is. It's great. And it is. And so I think that really going into it with an idea of like, I'm doing this because I love it. I love what I'm doing, and I know that there's gonna be all of these other pieces that come with it, and it is interesting, like, sometimes you work with people and you can tell it's not a fit for them because the extras or the things that come with being a special ed teacher, just they don't it just feels like too much, or they don't, like, connect with it in a way that feels meaningful, and then that's okay. Special ed is not for everybody, but if you love it, then it's like I try to encourage teachers to sort of stay on the bright side, look to the sun, because you can really easily go down that road. It's very easy to sit and talk about all the things that are bad and all the things that we should change and all the things, but that doesn't help us and it doesn't help kids. And so even to the point of like, I think I did a little mini training on this, but even to the point of like really thinking about, as a new teacher, who are you connecting with on your campus? Like, are they the teachers who immediately are going to sit and complain about every single thing that's happening at
Right.
school? Or are they the ones like, okay, this is, yeah, we can laugh about this or we'll figure it out? Because I have seen, and I'm sure you've seen too, working in schools, that depending on kind of where you spend your time during the day makes a lot of difference about your satisfaction with your job. And so just really thinking about making thoughtful decisions about that and how just your thinking is about special ed and about what you have to do. And then, like I said, be patient with yourself and understand it's a multi-year process to be able to feel comfortable and to feel like this is okay, I've got this. One of the things I always say to new people is if anybody comes into your classroom and says to you, all you have to do is, that's a red flag, right? Because there is no such thing as special education, is all you have to do. And I would say that for school psychs going into gen ed classrooms, going into special ed classrooms, special ed teachers going into gen ed, it's complicated. Kids are complicated creatures. And so it's not, nothing's that simple. So just really, be gentle with yourself, take your time. And if it's what you love, you'll get there, trust yourself that you'll get there. And never stop asking for help. That's the other piece. Because I think sometimes teachers feel like if they ask for help, then they're going to be looked at like they don't know what they're doing. And when I'm mentoring teachers, I'm always like, the more you ask me before, the better. So
Right.
instead of doing it and then us trying to like clean it up, ask me beforehand.
Mhm.
It was one of the things when I was program coordinator working with new principals, I'd always say, text me anytime. Before you say that thing, text me.
Before you hit send on the email, why don't you send it to me first?
Exactly, because it's a lot easier to change it now than it is to go back and have to clean it up.
Yes. Well, actually, what you were sharing reminded me, and I'm probably going to get the guy's name wrong. I think it's Jim Rohn, who talks about like you're the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. And so
Interesting.
if you are spending time, and we think about people who work in education, I mean, there's just certain people that you are around a lot, whether that's the teacher's lounge, whether it's your special ed assessment team members. And so, as much as you can to surround yourself with people who do have that growth mindset of, yeah, it's kind of horrible right now, but look what we get to do. We get to, help support the lives of these children and their families. And when we surround ourselves with people who have similar mindsets, that can really, really be helpful.
I agree. I think it makes such a difference just in the day-to-day, satisfaction and joy within your classroom too.
Yeah. Well, this podcast is called the Prepared School Psych Podcast. When you think of the term prepared, what do you do to help yourself feel more prepared in your different roles?
I mean, information is prepared to me. And so the more that I know, the more prepared I feel. And if I compare that to like working with a teacher entering into an IEP or, a contentious IEP, is like the most prepared you can be is to have the information in front of you. If you have the information in front of you, you don't have anything to worry about. And so I would always say that to teachers like if they had parents coming in and they knew they were going to be mad about this thing or they wanted this and I was like, "Well, have the data. And if it shows that what you're doing is working, you can be calm about it. You are prepared for that as opposed to like, I don't know, I'll get that information." So I feel that for myself as well is like I want to go in knowing what I know and knowing what I need to know so that I have that information. I also think it's really important to be able to be comfortable saying, I don't have that information right now. I'll get that for you. I do that all the time when I consult is like, huh, that's a really interesting thought. I don't know that, but I can definitely get that for you. And for teachers to be able to say that too, like, I'm not positive. I don't know even a quarter of everything that has to do with education. And that's why we have teams, right? And
Right.
so I think being prepared to me means knowing everything I can know and then being okay not knowing and being okay asking for help and being okay, looking further into things. So I think that's really important to me. And then it's a little bit different, but taking the time to build relationships with people. And
Mhm.
so that when I'm certainly when I'm consulting, is like my first thing is not going to be like, change this or this is terrible or whatever. It's like, let's have lunch, and just let me see how awesome your classroom is. Let me go in and watch and things like that so that you're more likely to get good results if you have relationships with people and you are able to understand the situation better. So I think both of those areas help me feel prepared when I walk into a situation.
Wonderful. Well, Brandy, thank you so much for sharing your insights and very practical strategies. Obviously, your expertise in IEPs and behavior management is invaluable for educators who are navigating these challenges. So, thank you for your time today on the podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was really fun.
Well, and if you found today's conversation helpful, be sure to subscribe to the Prepared School Psych podcast so you don't miss future episodes. And if you have any thoughts or questions, feel free to reach out. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening, and I will see you next time. That concludes another episode of the Prepared School Psych podcast. And I hope today's discussion equipped you not just with knowledge, but also the confidence to take action. Remember, every conversation we have and every resource we share builds a bridge towards a more inclusive and empowering learning landscape for our students. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to the podcast for more insightful conversations and resources to support your journey. Share this podcast with colleagues. We would love it if you would also rate and review the podcast. Thank you for tuning in. Just a reminder, everyone, the information and advice provided in this podcast are for guidance purposes only, and all listeners are required to follow both federal and state law and their own school district guidelines and policies. Thank you.